Thanks for joining us on 9 News Plus for our continued coverage of the mayoral runoff between Mike Johnston and Kelly Brough. And we've also got some city council runoffs to be decided tonight as well. Alton Dillard, a longtime former elections division official from the city of Denver, joins us now. And Alton, based on the results so far, about a 7-point gap between Mike Johnston and Kelly Brough. Is it too early to call, or where would you characterize the race at this point?
It's definitely too early to call, because one of the things you have to keep in mind is that Denver voters tend to vote on election day. So that first batch of ballots that you saw at 7 p.m., a lot of that's going to be the 65 and up demographic. And so some of the other demographics, 25-34, 45-54, those are still lagging a bit. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens when that 8:30 report comes out.
So that said, about 113,000 votes are in so far. You're saying that that's probably the majority of the 65 and older vote, which would perhaps maybe lean a bit more conservative. I'm going to glean a little bit here and read into the results a little bit. Mike Johnston probably a bit more progressive, although both candidates somewhere in the center, I would say. That said, maybe that younger vote, is it safe to say it may favor Mike Johnston a bit more, or will we get a bit of a better idea about that at 8:30 with the next?
We'll get a much better idea at 8:30,
okay,
because one of the things that we've been talking about is the very narrow sort of lack of delineation between these two candidates. I mean, great candidates, and as Kyle mentioned, they were burning up the forum, debate, coffee, tea circuit. They were out there putting in the work, and so it's just going to be a matter of seeing that, you know, the belief that Denver could do worse with, you know, with either of them. And if that's the case, then that may mean there's not a whole bunch more turnout to be seen. But just, you know, eyeballing some of the people that I saw walking down towards the elections division this afternoon, there appeared to be a very steady walk up going soon. And so that's why we always take pains to mention 7 o'clock is everything that's come in over the past 2+ weeks that people have had their ballots. So the 8:30 is usually where you start getting your first indicators of which way things are going to break.
Now let's say we start to see a bit more separation between Johnston and Brough at 8:30, even if it's marginal. Is that an indication to you that that's the point to where this mayoral race could be close to being called?
It could be. One of the risks with, you know, calling anything is just the fact that there is an 8-day post-election window for military and overseas ballots to get in, and that's also why a lot of great pains are taken to remind folks that nothing is official until the election is canvassed/certified. So these next couple of reports are really going to be telling. There's a lot of these margins right now. Nothing's insurmountable. There's some tough margins here, but also, like we were talking about before we came on, really keeping an eye on what's going on in Council 8. That's shaping up to be the early nail biter.
We got 3 city council runoffs in the 8th, 9th, and 10th districts. Get to that here in just a second. One final bit of something you told me before we came on that was quite interesting to me is that geography plays a pretty big role as well. So it's far northeast Denver. That vote is going to be trickling in over the next little while. Is that correct?
Correct. And I have seen a couple of races actually swing, but not anything citywide. So like when Happy Haynes won her school board race, she went to bed behind but then woke up ahead. When now Senator James Coleman ran for the State House originally, same thing happened there. And it's just pure geography. So some of the last ballots downtown are going to be from the corners of the city. So Grant Ranch out in that area, but then also Montbello Green Valley Ranch, because of their proximity to the airport. Those are usually the last ballots downtown just because of pure physical distance and the fact that a lot of communities of color, you know, especially folks who fought for the right to vote, have a cultural tie to election day. So, you know, even in this mail ballot model a few years ago in Montbello, we actually saw lines because of the amount of people that were voting on election day. So that trend, I think, is going to hold, where there's going to be a tidy amount of walk-up today. And so that's why the 8:30, we can do a little deeper dive on the analysis then.
Very, very interesting. I'm going to put on my dad hat here for a quick second for our audience, which means every vote counts, and we talk about this, everybody needs to vote. And you can see that most clearly. You were talking about the 8th district here for the city council runoff. Brad Rivera currently has a 25-vote lead over Chantel Lewis. Chantel Lewis, the more progressive of those two candidates there. In the 9th district, we were talking about this, or Kyle was talking about this a few minutes ago. Gerald Watson with a 30-point margin over Candy C. DeBaca. So you would think that Candy C. DeBaca going to probably get voted out. And then in the 10th district, we've got Chris Hines with about a 17-point lead on Hoffman there. So we've got some fairly, in some cases here, certainly a 25-vote margin. In the 8th, in the 10th is about a 900-vote margin right now. What can we expect over the next few hours?
Over the next few hours, you might see some of these numbers tighten a little bit, because a lot of this is really going to, again, come down to younger voters. And also people need to remember that there was a redistricting. So the districts that people may think of the traditional boundaries are not the same as they were for the last election. And so now you have to think, okay, what parts of Denver do younger voters live in? Where do the 25s and 30s and 35s, where do they live? Especially in a neighborhood where it may cost you $800,000 or $1 million to get into a home. So you have to start thinking in terms of the density and see what kind of growth is going on in the housing infrastructure in some of these areas, because that's where the pockets of the younger people are going to be.
And I'm thinking about the 9th and especially the 10th there, because it's a closer one. That's Cap Hill, that's full of young people, right?
Yes. And so one of the things with young people is just making sure that they understand that they need to be engaged in this process. And one of the things we always talk about is how all elections are important. So of course, the presidential, governor, U.S. Senate, those get all the headlines. But this is really going to determine the trajectory of our city going forward. And if you're like me, who wants to know about when the potholes are getting filled and when the bike underpass is going to be completed, those kind of on-the-ground pothole type of questions, that's what's going to get taken care of whoever wins the mayorship. Because the other thing that people have to remember, it's not the mayor out there on the shovel. And so because of the fact that they will have the ability to sort of, name people to these posts, that if some of these posts, Department of Safety, Aviation, those level of those cabinet level ones, but also remember there's an X factor there too, wherein City Council now has say over some of those top cabinet level positions.
It's fascinating. And again, to your point, this is why in a lot of these cases, these races are pretty often decided by tens, hundreds of votes, and we may see that here in a couple of these runoffs.
Yeah, remember Florida 2000 was decided by 537. And that's why, when people say, well, my vote doesn't count or my vote doesn't matter, or we're mad about the slate of candidates, so we're not going to vote at all, that just makes no sense to me.
Well, we'll find out more about this, but Alton Diller, in the meantime, thanks for joining us. We're going to go out to Marshall Zellinger here in just a few moments to get some insights from the Kelly Brough campaign that'll be coming up here in just a few moments. Thanks for joining us here on 90s Plus. Once again, I'm Chris Bianchi. Let's go out to Marshall Zallinger now at the Kelly Brough watch party. Marshall, what is the mood like there at the moment? Brough currently trailing by about 7 percentage points. And also, do we expect Brough to perhaps speak here in the next couple of minutes?
Well, when you got techno music going, the mood's pretty great. There was a little bit of a hiccup. I don't know if it was with the internet here or with the Denver election website, but there are results posted, well, I guess just on this wall now, and when the results posted about, I don't know, 7:05, 7:06, there was like an error message, so the people here didn't find out until about 7:15 that it was an 8,000 vote deficit after that first batch of ballots, but that hasn't changed the mood of the, I don't know, about 100 or a couple hundred people here that are, I don't know, Foster, would you say 100, 200, somewhere in that range? I don't like to estimate, but it's not, you know, I don't like to estimate, Chris, but it's more than 100 people here. And I know they're just hanging out until the next batch of ballots at 8:30, and as we learned, and as I've reported, we know that more than a third of people, like myself, vote on Election Day. So you have a significant number of ballots to be counted, but then when you do math, which we're not good at as journalists, but we pretend to be, if you're at a deficit of 7%, if you need to sway 8,000 votes in your favor for the next batch, you need to find, we'll know at 8:30, if the vote total starts to move toward Kelly Brough's favor, then you could believe that of that third or more people who vote on Election Day, it's going to trend in her direction, and you could start to like project out a little bit, but we won't know much until 8:30. And if Johnston's lead grows at 8:30, I think that's not a great sign for the people at this party.
Well, I guess to that, Marshall, maybe speaking to Kelly or speaking to people around there, is there an expectation about what might happen at 8:30? Is there optimism that maybe the vote does get narrowed, or have you not heard a whole lot on that yet?
I mean, this is something I asked Kelly Brough about. She talked with us in the media about 6:30, half an hour before ballots were due back to the city. And I asked, the question was, do you believe that you need the day of voters to go your way to have a chance at winning? And here's how she answered that.
I don't know, Marshall. I totally agree I'm the underdog. I think they've got millions more dollars than we do. But I've been an underdog my whole life, so I'm fine, scrappy and fighting from the back. And wait till you see the crew that's going to be here tonight. They look just like me. It feels good.
Chris, I don't know if her answer played there or not. I'm listening to someone. They're just updating what's going on at the party here behind me.
We heard that.
Was it a great answer?
Yes. Yeah, we heard that, Marshall.
Again, I prefaced it with about the money and that underdog from a money standpoint, because there was more money from the Mike Johnston Political Action Committee than there was from the Kelly Brough Political Action Committee. And as you and I have talked, this is money that is not money that goes directly to Brough or Johnston's campaign. This is money to a campaign that they have no say over how it's spent or what's supposed to happen with it. The money that went to Brough and Johnston was fairly even, but it was an avalanche more for the Johnston Political Action Committee that was able to get more messaging out to voters. And so that's the preface of the question. But she didn't answer whether or not she thought she needed the voters today that would swing in her favor.
Well, Marshall, I mean, that continues kind of a theme for Kelly Brough throughout this campaign. You heard it there a couple minutes ago, kind of playing that underdog card. I mean, I think that's something that Kelly Brough has kind of leaned into throughout the course of the campaign, and we saw it there. Perhaps this is par for the course in terms of the way that she's campaigned going back to last winter.
Yeah, on the underdog standpoint, I think her campaign went that direction, and you could tell Colorado and Denver voters don't like negative campaigning. And negative campaigning usually means you think you're behind and you're trying to paint your opponent in a different light that maybe people who support that person didn't realize. And what's interesting is that her negative campaigning, at least on TV, was about that political action committee and the outside money that was coming in to help Johnston, even though it wasn't going directly to Johnston's campaign. And again, it was much more money to that campaign helping Johnston than the campaign helping her was receiving. But let's not forget that she also had outside money helping her. What I found interesting about going negative is that she was chief of staff for John Hickenlooper when John Hickenlooper was mayor of Denver, and John Hickenlooper has a reputation of positive campaigning, quirky, goofy messaging about himself. And I asked Bruff, she touts being chief of staff to John Hickenlooper, but as senator now, a U.S. senator, he never said anything in this race to endorse her or voice support for her, and I asked her how she felt about that.
Yeah, hey, he donated to the campaign. Privately, he's been helpful, but I totally understand, right? He, as a sitting senator, wants to stay out. I respect that.
Private support can help all she wants to believe it can help, but public support might be enough to boost some people to be like, oh, he likes her, I like her, because I like him. Like, if people weren't making that connection, I don't know how many votes we're talking about there, but that could have played a role. And if you're touting your work with your former boss and your former boss doesn't tell the public, yeah, go for her, like, there's a disconnect there. And she may publicly say she understands. I wonder if privately, if she understands, or if it's like one of those moments.
Yeah. And by the way, kind of interesting to this, Marshall, something we actually talked about, I believe it was yesterday, was the fact that the public endorsements that may have swung more than a handful of votes came from Lisa Calderon, came from Leslie Herod on the progressive side of things in favor of Mike Johnston. And Kelly Brough, earlier in the campaign, had some, I'd say, she kind of went after those two a little bit, didn't she?
We got Wellington Webb came out in support of her, but that seemed to be more about her view versus Mike Johnston's view of Park Hill Golf Course. And let's not forget, both had the same view that they wanted Denver voters in April to vote yes on the ballot issue 2.0 that would have developed that land. But that was initially right after April. We heard from former Denver Mayor Wellington Webb throwing his support behind Kelly Brough, but then we didn't hear any other big names after that, really, and the ones we did hear went for Mike Johnston.
Absolutely, no doubt about that. Well, Marshall, we'll continue to check back in with you throughout the course of the evening. In the meantime, we'll leave you to the techno music behind you, and thanks for joining us here on 9 News Plus.
No problem. Thanks, Chris.
All right, we'll have another update at 8:35 here on 9 News Plus. More coverage on Channel 20 and here on 9 News Plus at 9 p.m. and also on 9 News and here on 9 News Plus at 10 p.m. as well. So long. We'll see you in a few minutes.